This is a picture taken in Clear Lake, a Ron Sims picture, but this is the clinic that I gave at St. Louis and this year, and then I gave it at the Chicagoland RPM. I think he's probably seen this thing about 5 times now, because he saw it at the museum in Boone when I gave it the first time. But
Yep,
anyway,
I've
this is
I've
the
I've got commentary.
yeah, right.
I'm mute.
You could probably give the presentation. Um, anyway, that's entitled Bricks, Butter, and Baldwin Electrics, and it's about the Mason City, Clear Lake, and the Iowa Terminal Railway. Um, it focuses on the years from about 1950 to maybe 1970, 72. So that's the kind of years that I'm focusing in. Uh, if you see this, the silver painted with the red trim Baldwin Electrics, that's pretty much 1961 or prior. And then in 1961, they were bought and the name changed to Iowa Terminal Railway, and they painted them traction orange and silver. And then now today it's the Iowa Traction Railway, which happened then in 1987. But anyway, the railroad still exists. It's still operational, still a freight only railroad, the last one in the last overhead wire freight operation in the United States. The bricks and butter come from their two largest customers, which was Mason City Brick and Tile, and then State Brand Creamery in Mason City also. So that's why I entitled it Bricks, Butter, and Baldwin Electrics. So to orientate you where in
Yes.
Iowa we are, there's Des Moines, and that red dot up there is Mason City. And why did
Oh,
Mason City have
no,
a
no sound.
You put your headphones in?
well,
We verified that Clark cannot hear, but we can
yeah,
hear
we
him.
can verify he can hear.
So I muted him. He's
Perfect. Thank you. I was going to call mom and tell him to mute his thing. Anyway, so why Mason City? Well, Mason City was important due to the fact that it had 5 trunk lines, 5 major class 1 railroads that went through it. The Milwaukee went east to west from Marquette, Iowa, out towards Spencer and Sanborn, and then on to Sioux Falls. And then they had this line that went kind of northeast, which is in orange also, that went up to Austin, Minnesota, and eventually on to Minneapolis. And then from the north, you had the Minneapolis St. Louis that came down from Minneapolis on its way to Marshalltown, Iowa, and then eventually on to Peoria, Illinois. And then you had the Chicago Great Western that went from came down from Minneapolis on its way to Omaha. And then you had the Rock Island that came through, which is in the yellow there. It had trackage rights on the Great Western through town on their line from Minneapolis to Kansas City. And then the green is the Chicago Northwestern, their line that came up from the south and went north through Mason City and on from Belle Plaine, Iowa, up to Fairmont, Minnesota. So it was a busy railroad town. And then on the south end of town, you had in black here the Mason City and Clear Lake, which ran between Mason City and Clear Lake, which is the electric railroad. Why Mason City? Because all these railroads came there because of the heavy industry. You had 2 large cement plants, the Northwestern States Portland Cement, that's the one that Clark worked for. The Lehigh Cement was also located in Mason City. You had a large packing house, Art Decker, and then it was later Armor Meat Packing. And then you had Sugar Beet on the north side of town. And then on the southwest side of town, you had the large Mason City Brick and Tile plant, which was served exclusively by the Mason City and Clear Lake. You can see this. This is kind of a shot looking northeast, from southeast to northeast. Downtown Mason City is the center top there, but you can see how expansive the brickyards there were in Mason City. So like I said, they were served by 5. Mason City was served by 5 class 1 railroads: the Milwaukee, the Rock Island, the Great Western, the Northwestern, the Emmett St. L. The Mason City Clear Lake interchanged with all 5 railroads, and they were the connecting railroad, which means they handled the interchange between the Rock Island, the Emmett St. L, the Emmett St. L, the Northwestern, and the Great Western and Emmett St. L. The main shops for the Mason City Clear Lake Railroad was at Emory, which is just a small little village, really. I don't think there's any houses there anymore. There was at the time, but small little village between Mason City and Clear Lake, about halfway in between. Still there, still where their shops and main yards are today. So we'll go through kind of just a brief history of the railroad. It was founded in the late 1800s by this guy named William Bryce. He was a railroad financier around Mason City, financed what was then or the predecessor to the Chicago Northwestern line that went from Belle Plaine up to Fairmont, Minnesota. But he also financed the Mason City and Clear Lake, and he wanted to tap the um, resort traffic from Clear Lake, and so because there was resorts over there on the lake, so he decided that he'd build an electric line between Mason City and Clear Lake. Um, it was a 600-volt line, and it opened on July 4th, 1897. In 1913, Bryce sold the railroad to the utility company in Mason City, Peoples Gas and Electric. In 1936, they lost their franchise for streetcar service. If you can see on that map to the right, all the bolder black lines are all the streetcar service that goes basically straight north there up through the city proper of Mason City. 1936, they lost the franchise for the streetcars and it was turned to buses, but that's when they tore up all the trolley lines in Mason City and it became a freight-only railroad. So those are all the lines there highlighted in red that they ripped up in 1936. In 1950, the utility sold it to a company executive that worked for the utility named Charles Strickland, and he ran it until 1961. But by the late 50s, Strickland was looking for a buyer. He approached them in St. L. He approached the Rock Island to buy the line from him, and neither railroad was interested. And in July 1st, or before that, a GM executive, General Motors executive, Harold Boyer, and a group of investors from Detroit bought the railroad. And so on July 1st, 1961, the name changed to Iowa Terminal Railroad, and they changed their paint scheme. So from 1961 to 1987, it was known as the Iowa Terminal Railroad. During that time, the Harold Boyer looked for expansion and other railroads to buy, and they also did some cost cutting where they removed part of the railroad that ran into downtown Clear Lake. They also bought another interurban, the Charles City Western, which was purchased in 1964. Now, the two railroads were never physically connected. However, there was a plan to physically connect them at one time by building new trackage from Charles City, which is about 23 miles or so east of Mason City. They were going to actually build a line to connect the two railroads, but they never actually did. But they were ran as two separate divisions of the Iowa Terminal Railroad, the Charles City Division and the Mason City Division. The Charles City Western was there because of the Oliver and then later White tractor plant that was in Charles City. That was their main business, but they never physically connected. Eventually, when White Tractor and the Oliver plant there closed down in Charles City Western, the Charles City Western division of the Iowa Terminal was abandoned, and which left only the original Mason City Clear Lake, which is still operating today. And it's known now today as the Iowa Traction Railroad. So we're going to take a tour of the railroad. We're going to start in Mason City, and we're going to work west towards Clear Lake. So this is where we'll begin. We'll begin there where the M and St. L and the Milwaukee transfers with the Mason City Clear Lake. So here's the east end. You can see the Milwaukee Road yard up there in the top corner of the map there. And then the M and St. L was coming south from Minneapolis towards Marshalltown. And there was a small interchange yard. The interchange yard there next to the number one is an industry. If you look on the thing, we'll talk about the customers, but the blocks with the numbers in them are customers that were serviced there. But anyway, the interchange yards with the M and St. L there is next to that number one block, or where they interchange with the Milwaukee is next to the number one block. And then the interchange with the M and St. L is next to that number two block there. In this area, they had three basically online customers. They had Northwestern Bell, which was the telephone company where they would get poles and other materials in. That's where number one is. And then the number two designated on the map is the Higley Cold Storage, where they would get reefers, loaded reefers there, and that, or where they would load reefers, I should say. And then down at the very bottom, number 3 is a trucking company warehouse that was located on a little spur there. And then at the very bottom where it says Ice House there, that was where the South Mason City yard was. They had a small yard and a yard office there, and they also had a loading ramp where they could unload flat cars and box cars. A lot of the implement dealers would use that, where they would get implements in, and then they would unload them there at South Mason City and either truck them or drive them to the implement dealers in Mason City. But we'll start here. So where you see the X on the map is where this photograph was taken. So here we're standing looking at the Milwaukee. He's pulling the transfer with the Mason City and Clear Lake and the Emmons St. L. We're kind of looking northeasterly. Here we're standing on 15th Street and we're looking north, and you can see the trolley line off to the left with all them open top hoppers. Those are hoppers being returned to the Milwaukee that were loaded with coal. The Mason City and Clear Lake, having its ties with the public utility in Mason City, also at one time serviced the coal-fired utility plant in Mason City, and they had a stockpile of coal that was out at Emery, where they would stockpile coal for the winter, because the coal unloading track uptown where the utility was so small, they could only leave a smaller pile up there, so they would take it out to Emery and stockpile it. But anyway, this is probably time freight number 20 coming south through Mason City on its way to Peoria, and he's passing there the interchange with the Milwaukee and the Mason City Clear Lake. We're kind of looking north here off of 15th Street. So that train here, this is a soft Marty picture, zooms by. We've turned, he's heading south towards Mason City, and right in front of the nose of the first unit on the Emmons St. L train is the trolley, or I'll refer to it as the trolley because I worked in Mason City on the railroad. We always called it the trolley. But anyway, it's the Mason City and Clear Lake, and he's coming up to do some transfer work. Same day, the Emmons St. L freight is gone, and here's the Mason City Clear Lake motor. He's crossing 15th Street. We're looking west. You can see the Bell Telephone warehouse there off to the right. He's most likely going up to pull and work the Milwaukee transfer. Here's on a different day, a spring day, and this is the Emmons St. L switch engine, and you can see he's switching cars over to the Milwaukee. He's just south of the Diamond. Well, we're standing on 15th Street, but he's south of the Diamond here, and you can see the cars off to the left, and you can see the trolley poles over there. Those are the interchange tracks for the Emmons St. L between the Milwaukee, but he's getting ready to work the Milwaukee interchange there next to the trolley. And here we are. This is down at that curve when it curves from going north-south, and it curves off to the west to go towards Clear Lake. We're still in Mason City, of course, but here he's rounding the curve. It looks like he's shoving up cars, probably to them 2 stub tracks south of 15th Street there by that B designation on the map. But he's most likely returning empty hoppers for interchange with the Emmons St. L, who will take him south into Illinois, probably to Peoria. Another shot there along that curve. He's working the transfers with the Emmons St. L. That Wilson, that's a WCLX car. That's probably going to go back towards Albert Lee on the Emmons St. L. Here's another shot. We're at the same position on that curve there looking north. You can see in the far, far distance the 2 stub tracks, which are the interchange to the Emmons St. L. Looks like he's got a couple Armour reefers and a couple Wilson reefers. So he's definitely working the Emmons St. L interchange there. Same curve, same area, just on a summer day now. And in the background, you can see that Higley cold storage there. That was served by the Mason City Clear Lake. They got in a lot of butter from the State Brand Creamery, which was located just about, maybe a mile and a half, 2 miles west of here. They would actually load reefers, usually NWX reefers, Northwestern reefers, full of butter. And if they weren't interchanged to another railroad, a lot of times they would have government contracts, and they would actually load the reefer just to bring it 2 miles over here to the east from the plant over here to the cold storage place, unload it, and then they would store it. And then when the government contracts were ready to be executed, they would load it onto trucks or reload it onto reefers and then ship it back out. So this 2 mile move, instead of trucking it across town, they actually loaded into reefers just to unload it again 2 miles across town. Here's another day. This is a better shot here. He's now moved down on that spring shot that we saw earlier when he was working the Milwaukee interchange. Now he's moved down. This is the MSNL switch engine, and he is working the Mason City and Clear Lake interchange tracks. You can see Higley Cold Storage way off to the left there, the white building, but he's in the process of now working the tracks, interchange tracks with the Mason City Clear Lake. Here's just another shot. We're standing on 19th Street looking north. This is time freight, probably 19 going north towards Minneapolis, but you can see the interchange tracks there with the Mason City, Clear Lake, and the MSNL. Here we are down now around the curve here by 19th Street, and here's that little warehouse, which was a trucking company warehouse. C.D. Hermy was the guy that owned the warehouse. At this time, the warehouse was no longer active anymore, and the Mason City Clear Lake would use it to store maintenance away equipment. So this is their line car there that they would store over there. So now we'll talk about South Mason City. South Mason City was the terminal or the yard for Mason City. It was just basically a little runaround there, so they could, if they were shoving cars over to shove up to or pulling cars over, they could run around these cars to shove them up into the interchange there, the two stub track interchanges with the Milwaukee or with the MSNL or the Milwaukee. There was also an ice house there where they would ice the reefers that they would get to go take over to State Brand Creamery, and they would also harvest ice at Clear Lake, and they would bring it over here to store at the ice house. And then there was also a yard office there. There was a clerk there. There was a train master. And then there was a loading ramp there, like I said, which was used by customers to get LCL and also implement dealers to unload flat cars. So icing was done here. This is a picture pre-1950 of them spotting some reefers to be iced at the ice house. It was a wood building there, but in late 1950, in October, I think it was 50 or 51, they had a really bad windstorm in Mason City, and it damaged the ice house, and the ice house was torn down. So after 1951, this is how the icing was done at South Mason City. It was done via truck from a company, an ice vendor there in town. Here's the little yard at South Mason City. The track off to its left, that's an old freight or an old baggage motor. I'm not sure what type. Don't ask me about these electric motors. I don't know much about them other than that they had Baldwins. But anyway, it was just basically there for storage. It was no longer being used at this time. It was used for maintenance away materials. But it's sitting on the stub track, and behind them box cars would be the unloading ramp. To the right, you see that freight motor. He's tied onto some reefers. That's the runaround track. That's the extent of the yard at South Mason City. This is 60-pound jointed rail. And what's interesting about this rail is that the joints aren't staggered. They're directly across from each other. So the whole way across, you didn't have staggered joints. You had these joints that were across from each other. So I can only imagine what the ride was like with having joints right next to each or right across from each other. Here's a nice shot. We're standing on 19th Street looking at the little yard there at South Mason City. You can see the yard office with the ramp. This is a soft Marty picture, probably the same day as that other previous picture was taken. That might be the clerk and one of the guys working at the South Mason City office crossing the street there.
Santa Fe.
Here's another shot of the South Mason City yard. We're standing basically on the stub track. You can see the yard office, little yard office there, and the unloading ramp. There's the South Mason City yard office. This is after 1961, which is evidenced by the Iowa Terminal Railway herald on the door. And by this time, the unloading ramp had been dismantled and taken down, but there's another shot. Now we're standing on the ramp, looking at east, standing on the ramp. They got a motor. They usually leave a couple motors over here at South Mason City for crews, so they could protect the interchange traffic and the industry over at the east end of Mason City. Another shot looking east, so we'll be looking east back towards the MSNL there. You can see in the background here, we're at South Mason City again, but you can see all the Northwestern reefers probably in storage, just waiting to either be iced or being ready to get billed to go over to the creamery to get loaded with butter. I just put this shot in here to show I like this scheme. I wish Progressive Rail, now who owns the Iowa Traction, they have one of these motors still that was an original Mason City Clear Lake motor. I wish they would do a heritage paint scheme and paint it like this. I know Clark has mentioned to one of the managers to hopefully paint it like, but, and I don't know how well this video is going to come across because in Zoom it's sometimes kind of choppy, but this is movies of the Mason City Clear Lake are exceedingly rare, but they're on the ground at South Mason City. So these are carmen trying to get the motor back on the ground. Of course, this is 60-pound rail, very light rail, but they're putting blocking underneath there. Now watch this guy. This is before a lot of safety concerns, but you can see him put the blocking underneath there and then whoop, pulls ahead and the guy just gets out of the way just in time. But you can see that long string of reefers there. They were probably shoving over towards the transfer or probably pulling over towards the State Brand Creek. But it's hard to find pre-1961 movies of the Mason City and Clear Lake.
No kidding.
So now we'll look at the second kind of part here. We'll go from South Mason City. We'll keep heading west. We'll look at the interchange with the Chicago Northwestern, and we'll also look at some of the little industry that was on that segment from South Mason City west towards the interchange with the Northwestern. So here's the area that we're going to talk about, South Mason City to Clear Lake Junction. There's only one real customer on that, which was Nichols Wire, later Central State Steel. They were a steel warehouse, fencing, steel panels, things like that. And then they had interchange with the Chicago Northwestern. And then they had interchange there where it says B with the Chicago Northwest or Chicago Great Western and Rock Island there at Clear Lake Junction. Remember, the Rock Island had trackage rights on the Chicago Great Western at Clear Lake Junction. Clear Lake Junction is a Chicago Great Western station. That operator there at that station controlled the diamond for the Mason City Clear Lake, which crossed the Great Western Main Line, and also for the Rock Island, the switch for the Rock Island to get on so they could get their trackage rights on through town. So we'll start here at South Mason City. Here he is now working South Mason City. This is kind of the east end of South Mason City. It wasn't a very big yard, maybe just a couple blocks long. And then we'll take a look here where they cross Federal Avenue. Federal Avenue is US Highway 65 that runs north and south through Mason City. It basically is the main drag, Main Street through Mason City. It splits Mason City east and west. Is the main drag through Mason City. Here is now we're after 1961 because this had been lettered Iowa Terminal Railroad, but here he is just getting ready to cross. There was a McDonald's there, and he's getting ready to cross US Highway 65 or Federal Avenue. There he is crossing Federal Avenue. You see the gas station to the left there. Here we are on another day. This is a soft Marty shot. He got a ride, but we're looking east towards South Mason City. You can see cars up there on each track on the left and right at the top of the hill there. But there's the McDonald's off to the left that was on South Federal there at Mason City. This is a shot of one of their cars. This was on a fan trip day that they had. This is post 1961 because it has changed now to Iowa Terminal. And I kind of like their slogan, IT has the connections. So it has the connections. The Iowa Terminal has the connections. I thought that was kind of clever using their reporting marks for that. But most likely they're stopped at McDonald's to go over. The people on the fan trip are stopped at McDonald's there to go have lunch. Now we'll kind of move a little further west here to the interchange with the Chicago Northwestern. This was that line that came up out of Belle Plaine, went north up to Fairmont, Blue Earth, and then towards Fairmont. But they had an interchange there. They had two-track interchange with the Northwestern. So here we are. We're just east of that interchange where that lady is standing there on the road. This is that fan trip day. but this is or a fan trip day. This is we're standing on 19th Street, which is Old Highway 106. Where that lady is standing, there's a gate, and that gate is swung across the Northwestern. That was a gated crossing there between the Northwestern and the Mason City and Clear Lake. Here we are on another day. Here he is. He's probably shoving towards South Mason City, so he's probably shoving to the right, which is east. But there you can see the gate is swung across the crossing there, where the Northwestern crosses the Mason City and Clear Lake. We're standing just on the south side of 19th Street, kind of looking northwest. That white building in the back is that Central State Steel. Here we are on a little snowier day, still post 1961, because now the Motors is lettered for the Iowa Terminal, but he's getting ready to cross, and they're getting down here off the motor. You can see just off to the left there, the guy has got the box open, running the time down on the gate so he can swing the gate over the Northwestern and get across the diamond. There he is. He's got the unlock there, or the box open to get the unlock for the gate. Once he gets that, he'll swing that across, and then he'll head, looks like he's going to head west towards probably towards State Brand Creamery. Here we are. Now we're on the west side of the diamond. He's actually shoving across 19th Street towards kind of the southeast. To the right would be the interchange tracks with the Northwestern. So it looks like he's pulling out of the Northwestern interchange there. Here's another day we're standing kind of looking the opposite direction. Central State Steel in the background. Apparently that day they had some trouble with the overhead wire, so they got the line car out to make some repairs to the wire, but he is on the interchange, the track that went over and crossed the highway and went over to the interchange there with the Northwestern. Here we're looking basically turned around, now looking south, and it looks like there he's shoving into the interchange tracks with the Northwestern. This is a couple sequence shots. You can see the interchange track there with the Northwestern and the Mason City Clear Lake, them two tracks there with cars on them. But this is the local that came up out of Belle Plaine to Mason City. This is the Northwestern local. He's getting ready now to cross 19th Street. And then as soon as he crosses 19th Street, he'll hit the diamond with the Mason City Clear Lake. Soft Marty took a kind of a sequence of shots here. So here he's crossing 19th Street. There he's crossed the diamond. There's the smash board on the Mason City Clear Lake. And then he's pulling his train and heading up to the North Yard there in Mason City. His caboose has now just cleared the diamond with the Mason City Clear Lake. This is the smash board over here on the west side of the diamond, protecting the diamond there. Here's a movie taken in about 1972. Hopefully it's not coming too pixelated, but you can see the red caboose is the transfer caboose on the Northwestern. He's shoving through the transfer tracks. He's picked up cars from the Iowa Terminal now, and he's shoving north back towards their yard on the north side of town. So you can see that the smash board is down, and he's shoving his cars past. The motor on the other side, the Iowa Terminal motor, now after he's gone across, has opened the diamond. He's pushing the gate across the Northwestern tracks. The other side is mechanically driven to pull that arm up, and he gets the unlock and he goes across the diamond, and he's going to go pick up the cars now that the Northwestern has delivered to the Mason City and Clear Lake, or the Iowa Terminal. So now he's crossed 19th Street. He's heading down to get the cars that the Northwestern has just delivered. Excuse me. The guy on the nose of the engine is and the nose of the motor is standing there with his hand on the wire to kind of make sure that the pole doesn't come off of the overhead wire there.
Yeah.
Mm.
see the interchange track there. There's definitely a weed problem. You can barely see the rail there. The Iowa terminal was a very frugal outfit at this time by the 70s. I noticed that weed problem, but I also found another movie of showing same area there. He's going to swing the gate across the Northwestern, but they're going to address the weed problem here. So he's got the gate across and he's heading east now. And here's the extent of the weed spraying operation on the Iowa terminal.
Wow. A hand pump. Mm.
Now they've restored the gate and they're going to head east and keep spraying. And these are probably some college kids or some guys that are not worried about any exposure to any chemicals at that time, but at least they stopped when they went by the kids and over the crossing, they stopped spraying and they'll go back to spraying again. Yeah, a very frugal outfit. So we'll head now, we'll take a look at that one customer that was over there, which is Central States Steel. This time at the Mason City Clear Lake time, it was called Nichols Wire and Steel. And but this is you can see it in the background, but he's going to get ready to shove across the highway into the Northwestern interchanges. But this shows kind of the industry there. Here's on a snowier day, they're running a plow train off to the right there by this motor that's parked on the siding, but you can see the Central States Steel warehouse in the background. This is the only picture that I could find, but there was a depressed track that went underneath there to unloading platform where they could unload boxcars of siding and steel. But that shows that depressed track there. Okay, we'll head a little bit west here. This picture was taken on this little line that went up towards the brick and tile plants. There was 5 at one time brick and tile plants, separate plants, but they were all Mason City brick and tile plants, but they were all numbered. So you had plant 1, plant 2, plant 3, plant 4, plant 5. But this, I think, went up to plant 3. And this was where that X is and the line goes up to the top of the map at an angle. That was a lead to one of the plants at the brickyards. And so there was a shot there taken showing that lead that went back up to that. I think it's plant 2 or plant 3. And we'll talk now about Clear Lake Junction. Clear Lake Junction, like I said, was the interchange with the Great Western and the Rock Island joint trackage. The Great Western owned it. This was the Great Western station, but like I said, there was an operator there that controlled the diamond with the Mason City Clear Lake and also controlled the Rock Island getting on and off the joint trackage. Here's kind of a schematic I found of the station there at Clear Lake Junction. This is out of a Great Western book. This is orientated a little different. You can see the legend there, or the north arrow off to the left. But here you got the Mason City Clear Lake going east to west, and then you've got the Great Western going kind of southeast to northeast, or southwest to northeast, and then the Rock Island came in, and then had joint trackage through town. Like I said, the operator there controlled all this stuff mechanically through levers from the station there at Clear Lake Junction. Here's the picture. We're standing on Highway 106 or 19th Street, looking at the backside of the depot there. The Mason City Clear Lake tracks are in the foreground. You can barely make them out in the grass there. In 1964, the station was closed, and this diamond was automated kind of automated. It was run by push buttons. So they would push a button on the mast of the new signal and it would ring a bell uptown to the Great Western passenger station uptown in Mason City, which was a couple mile and a half north of here. And then once they got that bell and there was no traffic coming on the Great Western track there, they would give the Mason City Clear Lake the light to go across the diamond. This picture was taken just prior to 1964, or maybe even in 1964, because you can see the wire, rolls of wire there off to the side there. They're getting ready to put in the new wiring and stuff for the automatic or for the signals so they can close the station. You can see the reels there, wire and the crates, their signal material there. They're getting ready to do that. This, we're looking now at the business side of the Mason City the Clear Lake Junction. You can see the operator in the window there, but this is the Great Western main line. Here's the inside of the tower, or well, they considered a tower, I guess, but the inside of the depot at Clear Lake Junction, those are all the levers that control the various switches and the semaphores and stuff for the interchange tracks and the tracks from the Rock Island onto the Great Western and the Diamond there with the Mason City Clear Lake. There's the operator's desk inside the depot. So here we are, stay on 19th Street. Here showing the trolley going or the Mason City Clear Lake going across there. Here we are now after they got rid of the semaphores and all the linkage and everything. The station is now closed, but there's the two color light signals. There's that little black box, if you can make it out on the bottom of the signal mast. That's where the button was, where they would push, which would ring a bell uptown to get a hold of the operator uptown to see if the trolley could get across. Before this, it was a series of whistle signals that they would whistle off and to get the operator's attention there in the depot at Clear Lake Junction. But like I said, this is post 1964. We're looking east back towards the area that we already talked about, sitting in a cab of one of the electric motors. Here's the Rock Island train. Like I said, it was joint Rock Island Great Western trackage, but this is a southbound. We're looking kind of northeast. This is a southbound Rock Island train coming across, getting ready to cross the Diamond there with the Mason City and Clear Lake. To the left is the tracks there where they would interchange with the Rock Island and the Chicago Great Western. Here he is this is a Mason City Clear Lake motor on the interchange tracks with the Great Western and the Rock Island. You can see the crossover there from the main line over to the interchange tracks. In the very, very distance, you can see a couple stacks in between the pole line there. Those are stacks from the kilns up at the Mason City brick and tile plants. Here we are in a earlier day, probably in the 50s, mid to late 50s, but we're standing just outside the depot, at the backside of the depot, Clear Lake Junction looking west. He's rounding the curve there, most likely shoving up into the interchange with the Great Western. There's a Great Western boxcar there, I see, but he's probably shoving into the interchange there. Another shot on a wintry day, going with one of their maintenance way line cars going across the Diamond, heading east. Standing on the Great Western here, looking south, you can see the double semaphore just above the guy's head who's walking next to the tracks. That was the signals for the Great Western and the Rock Island there. That's where the Rock Island track came in on their way off from Kansas City up north to Minneapolis. That's where they got on the joint trackage down there. Another shot of them working the interchange. This is the Great Western local that came from Hayfield, Minnesota, and worked down to Clarion. He's heading south there, getting ready to cross the highway 106. We're looking east. The depot there is just above them tank cars. Now we're looking north. This shows the signals after the semaphores were taken down, but this shows the signals there. The one on the left, the track we're standing on, is the Great Western on their line between Hayfield, Minnesota and Clarion, which eventually goes down to Omaha. But to the right is the Rock Island with the silver painted mass. That's the Rock Island line that came from Kansas City on their way up to Minneapolis. They got on joint trackage rights. They had trackage rights for about, 12 miles or so between here and Manly, Iowa, which is where they got off the Great Western. This is an interesting picture here. This is a Rock Island northbound train. He's just getting ready to cross the Iowa Terminal Diamond. The Iowa Terminal has just replaced this diamond, but you can see it's there's a curve through the diamond there. It's no longer straight. Well, somebody screwed up with their measurements and they got the angle wrong on the diamond. So they had to use this diamond temporarily until they could get the new one or get one to replace this one or get this one fixed. But somebody had screwed up with the geometry of the diamond and they put it together and this is how it turned out, but they eventually fixed it. But for a while there, this is what the diamond looked like between the Great Western and the Iowa Terminal. Next area we'll kind of talk west now of Clear Lake Junction. We're still in Mason City. We're still not, this time we're on the very southwest side of Mason City. But we'll talk about the Mason City Brick and Tile, which was the largest customer. And the second largest customer, which was Iowa State Brand Creamery. They're marked by 1 and 2 on the map. And then the interchange, they had a second interchange with the Milwaukee up there where the A is located. Like I said, here's an overhead view just showing the different plants of the Mason City Brick and Tile, like I said, which is exclusively served by the Mason City Clear Lake. You can see there's several tracks that swing off there from left to right in this first plant, this larger plant that's to the bottom. They had a couple leads into the plant that was to the east there on the right hand side, and then a couple leads that went up into the north plant there. The Brick and Tile plant also had their own electric railroad. They had these side dump cars that would go out to the quarries where they would the pits where they would get the clay, and they would fill these side dump cars, which would take them to a central unloading facility, and then it was a conveyor to the different mixing and extruding plants at the Mason City Brick and Tile. Here's one of them side dump cars. And here he is dumping. He'll dump it into a hopper, and then you can see that kind of elevator shaft there. It looks like almost like a mine shaft elevator that will auger it or take it on belts over to the different plants to be mixed, so they can mix it and then take it and extrude it and make tile, either drain tile or brick out of it. Here's an aerial view of this area. At this time, this aerial view, plants 2, 3, and 4 were still active out of the original 5 that were there. The big white or big black blobs there are the clay pits in that area. Those were pretty much just about exhausted at that time. They were still taking some out of there, but they had several pits even yet to the west of here. But this gives you all the track in red was Mason City and Clear Lake. That was all their track. And then the tracks on the bottom of the map, the 3 that turned to the bottom of the map, that's State Brand Creamery over there. So quite an extensive area there that they served the brick and tile plants. So here's a shot taken here. He's just crossed the diamond there, and he's probably shoving towards the east side of town, towards the transfers. But this shows if you can make out all these poles, all this mess off the right-hand side, that's the lead, one of the leads that goes up to the Mason City Brick and Tile. Here's kind of a shot further down, but you can see there's some box cars off here to the left of the motor, and you can see the stacks for the kilns there at the Mason City Brick and Tile plant. And you can see the box cars shoved up there to be loading. My dad, one of his first jobs after high school, and when he moved to Mason City in 1968 or 69, he was a shipping clerk and then he became shipping manager, and he dealt with the Iowa Terminal and way billing these cars of tile and brick. They were loaded in box cars and then loaded packed with hay to prevent damage. But he said they still got a lot of damage claims. Here we are. There's a motor sitting over here on the main. Here's a motor shoving a string of box cars up that lead that goes up to the Mason City Brick and Tile plants. Another shot, same area. You can see the stacks in the background there. It's funny because you have a lot of rail fan shots of this railroad, but you don't have very many shots of inside the plant because rail fans couldn't get inside the plant to take pictures of the railroad inside the plant. Here's the same area. He's got some stock cars there, but he's shoving up around the curve with probably going up there to grab them box cars. But I did find one of inside the plant. So he's up here in this plant the very south plant. And it's kind of a blurry shot, but these cracks they weren't depressed. This was all built up platform, as you can see by the side there, built up with tile brick. And so everything was level with a boxcar height. So they could just wheel in carts and stack that brick by hand in a brick or drain tile in by hand into the boxcars. But this is the only shot that I've ever seen inside these color shot anyway, seen inside these plants. This is pre-1961 because of the silver motor there. So this is still in the Mason City and Clear Lake Railroad days. And then they also had, when they had this lead that went up to the very north plant there, they had a second interchange with the Milwaukee Road up there. Now, I'm not sure why, if that was just exclusively for transfers that would go in and out of the brick plants, but the Milwaukee did not go into the brick plants. But here we're sitting in a motor in Iowa Terminal days, and here's the Milwaukee switch engine. They're getting ready to hand cars off to one another. This track that he's sitting on just goes down in the weeds and stubs that the motor is sitting on there. Now we'll talk about the Iowa State Brand Creamery, which is the second largest customer. Here's an aerial shot of the State Brand Creamery. Originally, it was just the plant to the left, and they made butter there. And then in the 50s, they started doing dried milk or powdered milk, and that rectangular building off to the right was added, and that's the evaporation. The evaporation plant was installed, and then I think that rectangular building over there was a warehouse where they would load powdered milk. You can see there's some boxcars off to the right there for loading, but they had 3 tracks into this facility. Here's inside the loading platform in the center of the factory or the plant. These are tubs of butter that they're rolling into reefers there inside the plant. Here we're standing on 106 or 19th Street, and you can see he's getting ready to pull out of the plant. He's probably just spotted reefers, but I like that billboard there on the plant there, kind of 3D with the State Brand Creameries, and it kind of has the box, and it's almost like it's falling out of the billboard there. Here we are looking west now, and looks like he's shoving in reefers to get loaded into that into that first track there. Here's a better shot showing the track going down, and then it was built up on each side there so they could just roll directly across load into the reefer doors. Another shot of him working that same reefer track. This is a shot I came across. This is after they had built that warehouse for the powdered milk, after they had built the evaporation plant at the creamery, but this is one of their line cars, and you can see they got the highway torn up there, and they're getting ready to install the switch to make that third track so they can spot box cars to load with powdered milk. This is after the track has been put in. You can see that newer style crossbuck there on the highway there. That's that new track that they had just put in that goes to the powdered milk warehouse. Same day, a little bit further up towards the middle track there, you can see the old style crossbuck, but the crew evidently came out today to pose on their motor. Now, a little bit west of here was kind of a little subdivision called Central Heights. And it was a group of houses on the very, very southwest side, kind of outside of city limits. It was called Central Heights, still is. It may not be anymore, but was when I was growing up. And it's about a 4 or 5 block by 5 block area of houses. But it was on the railroad, it was called West Mason City. And at one time, I would imagine they picked up passengers there to bring them into town to go to work, maybe at the brickyards or something like that. But at the time that we're talking about, you can see the houses off to the left. It was just a station sign now called West Mason City. Okay, so now we're leaving the west side of Mason City, And we're coming to that little village of Emery where the generating plant was for the railroad to generate the electricity. And then also, well, the inverters and stuff, and then where their shops were, and then where they had a little yard. Here's an aerial view of the area of Emery in 1948. So it's going from left to right. That factory on the left with the stack, that was a hemp plant that was built during the war, during the World War II time, that at this time was probably was deactivated as a hemp plant and was a washing machine factory. And then later it turned into a motorhome company. But there was a track that went into there. And then you can see the large stockpile of coal that I was telling you about that they would use for storage out here. And then they would bring it in as needed uptown because of the lack of storage for a large coal pile uptown for the utility plant uptown. And in the center, you can see the large car barn. That was their car barn at one time for the trolley cars, but also for to do any car work or car repair. And then the building with the kind of hip roof building in the center, that's the main Emery shops. To the back of that was the inverter and where the where the the generating facility was for the overhead wire. And off to the right, to the very kind of top right section there, that was a thermal gas dealer who got in tank cars of propane. In that kind of area just to the south of the shop area there, that big kind of open field just directly kind of left of the coal pile there, top and left, that area right after this photograph was taken was sold to Cashaway Lumber, and Cashaway Lumber built a lumber yard out there, which also got cars. That Cashaway Lumber comes in is an integral part of the story of the Mason City and Iowa Terminal railroads. So here's kind of a map of the area. Eventually, Litgrid Fertilizer did build a plant out there in the late 50s or mid 50s. But you can see I put in the Cashaway Lumber, Thermogas, the car shop, the old shop, which at this time was still active, and then the coal piles. And then at my time, what we're talking, it was a motorhome plant there, Lifetime Motors. We're going to start taking a picture here. We're standing basically on the main line as the center track. There's sidings off to the left and right here. But you can see in the background there, there's a burrow crane or a crane over there. That's the pile where he would take a clamshell and reload into hoppers the coal to take it back uptown to the utility plant. And you can also see a carload of, looks like 2 flat cars together there with a pull of long, tall poles getting ready to be unloaded, most likely for the utility company. But we're looking east towards Mason City. Now, if we turn around, we're looking west towards Clear Lake. That abandoned car body over there, that's the sanding facility. That's where they stored locomotive sand. Here we're at the same spot. We're kind of looking northwest. That's the shops. At this time, that's what the shops look like. Of course, it was made out of Mason City brick, but that's the main shops for the Mason City and Clear Lake. That's where all the power generation was done, and that's where the work on all the locomotives and stuff was done. We'll kind of go up here and look at the shop. Here we are looking kind of over towards the shop. You can see there's rail stacked up there. There's poles, there's fence posts. But anyway, he's got a tank car, pressurized tank car. He's getting ready to shove up to the thermal gas dealer, which is just off to the right of this photograph. It's kind of neat because the switch that went into the shop area was a 3-way stub switch like this. There was 2 of them there at Emery. So that had to be a hell of a switch to try and throw in the wintertime. Here's the outside of the shop. This is post 1961 because the motors now are painted orange. So this is during the Iowa Terminal days. But this is, you can see the business side of the shop there with the big doors to let the motors in and out. Then also you can see the back side of the shop there that faced the parking lot. Here's a picture taken outside. They took pride of this little shop. They had it all nice and painted. They even went to, if you look to the right-hand side there, they went into the trouble to even put a window box in and plant flowers in the window of the shop there, if you can see that off to the right. Here we're going to look at a picture taken just outside the car shop there, looking north. Like I said, this was the car shop. This was taken out. Like I said, this is where they would, when they did trolley car line service, this is where they would do the work on those cars and store those cars. This was torn down in the mid-60s. This is a shot here taken kind of looking northeast, but there's that fertilizer dealer that was there, that was serviced there. This is right after they had bought the Charles City Western, which was, I believe, December 31st, 1963, is when they bought the Charles City Western. They bought these Lake Erie and Northern Railway motors, and they were in the process of repainting them, and they were heavier motors to be used on the Charles City division for extra power. But eventually, what they planning on do, these were going to be the motors that were going to run on the track that was going to connect the Mason City and Clear Lake and the Charles City Western that they were going to build between Mason City and Charles City, which never occurred. Here we're down here towards the Cashway Lumber. It's kind of neat because there was a diamond they came off that Y and crossed the west leg of the Y at a diamond to get over to build the track into Cashway Lumber. So we're standing by that. He's on the Y, and that diamond in front of us is the track that went over to service the new Cashway Lumber building. So here we are. Here's another picture of that sand house. Here it is after they tore it down. This kind of gives us a shot. You can see the shops in the background, and then you can see in the foreground the Cashway Lumber building. This is standing on Highway 106. You can see this is the track that goes through the highway there. That was the track that went over to the motorhome plant, the old hemp plant. But here we're looking kind of northwest again. This was a track that they used that was next to the highway. They used for storage or maintenance away equipment, or at this time, motors that they had cannibalized for parts. But we're looking northwest. You can see the Cashway Lumber and then the shops in the background. Here's some of the cannibalized motors that they had setting along the siding there, along Highway 106, that they were using for parts. And here's a picture here on the Weston Emery with him going by with some cars, probably heading towards Clear Lake. But there's the Cashway Lumber in the background. Now, on so the day before Thanksgiving, 1967, a fire started at the Cashway Lumber, and it was very strong south winds, and it carried, you're talking that, there's no fire department out here, so it'd be like Mason City or Clear Lake would have to come out of town to come over to extinguish this fire. By the time they got out there, the Cashway Lumber was involved, and of course, then it had blown over and caught their shop building on fire. It completely burned the shop building down to the ground, as we'll see here in a minute. But in several trolley cars that they had stored there that they used for their fan excursions and stuff, and one of their freight motors was completely destroyed. And of course, the electrical equipment was destroyed that powered the overhead wire. So for about 2 weeks, they leased a Whitcomb diesel from the Rock Island to run the railroad while they got power restored to the overhead wire. Just to show you how close proximity, there's the Cashway Lumber shed that caught fire, and it's not just a road length across is the shop. So like I said, you had these strong south winds, and it completely engulfed. And here was the aftermath.
Hmm. Oh,
They eventually rebuilt the shops. The decision was made to keep the overhead wire. They eventually rebuilt the shops. It's a pole building, and it is the building that is there now today. But while they were without power, like I said, they released this Whitcomb diesel from the Rock Island, and here he is. You can see him. He's switching State Brand Creamery, which we talked about just earlier. But it was kind of nice to find the shot of that two week period where they were using this Rock Island engine to run the railroad right after the fire. And now we'll head to the very end of the railroad, or towards the very end of the railroad. We'll head towards Clear Lake. Clear Lake sits about 9 miles west of Mason City. Interstate 35, the current Interstate 35 would go right to the left of where you see the number 1 there. That number 1 is Great Lakes Pipeline, which is Williams Pipeline, and now it's Magellan or somebody else. But that pipeline company is still there. It's a gas pipeline company with great big storage tanks over there. That's still there. But that's basically where Interstate 35 runs north and south through Clear Lake there. But anyway, we'll talk about the customers. You had that Great Lakes Pipeline. You had number 2, you had is Kennedy and Sons, which is the potato and onions and sugar beets. They grew those commodities and shipped them out by rail. And then you had a little on the south end here where 3, 4, and 5 are, was a little industrial park. And down there you had Zeidler Concrete. They made concrete blocks. So they got in carloads of aggregate and they got carloads of cement in. And then you had a thermal gas dealer, and you had a stockyard down there. And that stockyard shipped up and through the 60s. They would ship livestock out of there. And then as you went to the west of here, you got on basically where Kennedy is. The track swung over and went down the center of Main Street. And you had street running downtown all the way to this little depot area where you had the grain elevator, and you had Clear Lake Lumber, and then there was a loading platform down there that they would load LCL from. But the tracks eventually, where 7 is, way back when, would go up and around and kind of follow the lakefront there, because that's where the lake resorts were. But at this time, they had cut that track back just to go up Main Street just a little ways further to service the Farmers Lumber Company, or Clear Lake Lumber. So we'll take this in chunks, and we'll start here at the east end of Clear Lake. We'll talk about the industries in this little area here. This is called Baker's Corner. You can see he's got stock cars. He's coming back from at Clear Lake, probably loaded with stock, heading for interchange with one of the railroads at Mason City. But this is called Baker's Corner. Here we'll start looking at the the Great Lakes Pipeline Company. Here he is switching cars. They would load these cars with gasoline and then take them over to Mason City for interchange with one of the 5 Class 1 railroads. But here he is there. There was a couple there's a siding off of the main line there, couple sidings off the main line there. They could store excess cars for storage there that were going to go get built into the pipeline company. Here he is crossing now. This is Main Street. It was gravel at this time on the east end of Clear Lake, but he's crossing there, and he's shoving into to spot the cars into the pipeline plant. So he's got to have some idler cars, because if you notice, the overhead wire only goes about maybe 4 or 5 car lengths back in here, and then you can see off to the left of the motor the loading platforms. Well, having electricity sparking from a pole where you're loading gasoline, into tank cars is not good. So he had to grab 5 or 6 cars so he could reach back in there and spot them cars. So he'd always have a string of empties, or maybe even some loads, whatever he could use for reacher cars that he could shove back in there to reach the platform. And then later on, a lot of times what they do is they would shove the cars in, and the guy would come out with a tractor, and he would just push them in to spot. But this time they were using cars to reach in and do that. Here he is coming back out. That brick building above the conductor there, behind the conductor, that's the Kennedy and Sons warehouse. So he's done here now at the pipeline company, and he's working the siding. And what he's doing is he's switching his cars out, getting ready to go down into that industrial park, which would be off to the left a little ways, probably maybe a quarter of a mile or so. But looks like he's got a couple of hopper cars for Zeidler Concrete, probably with aggregate, probably with haydite to make blocks out of. And then he's got a couple pressurized tank cars, probably for the thermal gas dealer there in the industrial park. It looks like a boxcar and a reefer that probably go downtown. So we'll talk about Kennedy, which is the next industry here. So Kennedy Warehouse there is right behind there, off to the right there. Like I said, they grew onions, potatoes, and sugar beets. And when I was researching this thing, Clark lives up in Mason City. I live in Humboldt, about an hour and a half away, but he went over to Clear Lake for me to talk to the Clear Lake Historical Society to ask them about what they had for material on the railroad there. And they didn't have much, but the lady that was docent at the museum said that she grew up along Main Street. And she remembers them loading cars off of Main Street with trucks, and they would load cars off of Main Street. I thought, well, this lady's full of shit. I know they didn't do that. Well, then I came across this, and sure as hell, what's going on here is those cars to the very, very left there, and you can barely see them. You can see that they're loaded. Those hopper cars down there, they're loaded. They're heaped up pretty high. Those are sugar beets. So they would shove these cars and they would load these empty hoppers over here at Clear Lake, and the trucks would just basically come down the road, and they would have a conveyor. They would dump, and then they would load directly from the street into these open top hoppers, and then
Hmm.
they would load them, and the Mason City and Clear Lake or our terminal would take them over to Mason City, give them to the Great Western, and the Great Western would take them to the north side of town where that big sugar beet factory was. So this is taken in the fall, and this shows them loading beets into cars off of Main Street there at Clear Lake. So Kennedy's was kind of a seasonal thing, because they were growers. So when they weren't using their track here at their warehouse to load potatoes and to load onions and carrots and stuff, they would the Iowa Terminal or the Mason City Clear Lake this was a street sweeper, and this is what they would use to sweep the tracks off because it was street running downtown into Clear Lake. This is what they used to keep the tracks clean at Clear Lake. They would store this there at the Kennedy Warehouse spur. So here we'll just move a little bit to the west. We're heading down now into the city proper of Clear Lake. And as you can see, now we're on Main Street and we're street running, and we're shoving down to the switch that will go to that little industrial park off to the left. And here we are now on Main Street. You can see we're in town now, Clear Lake. But here he is at that switch in the middle of Main Street. And he's getting ready to shove these cars down into the industrial park there to the left. Those are two pressurized tank cars, probably going down to that propane dealer down there. So he's left some cars that need to go downtown Clear Lake to the elevator or to downtown to the depot area, and he's shoving down in the industrial park. Now, pictures of down in this industrial park are really rare, but I did come across some black and white ones. So here he is, he's shoved down. We're down in the industrial park. You can see he's got a pressurized tank car. And then you have this maintenance away car guy off to the left here. Well, what he was doing is he was shoving in the clear on this little stub track. This is the stub track that he's on is the track that went to the stockyards down here. But anyway, that little cart that he's pulling with his little maintenance away trolley car there is on that is an asphalt cooker. And what he was doing was he was filling in potholes along the track in Clear Lake. And so when these guys needed to get down here, he shoved back in here to clear up for them so they could come down and work the industrial park. Here's a shot taken right outside Zeidler Concrete. He has probably already made the swap with the pressurized tank cars, and he's probably reaching in there to get an empty hopper or maybe an empty cement hopper. But there's an auger at the top of the roof line of that building in the background. That was an overhead auger for either for the cement or for the rock that they unloaded there. They made concrete block there. I believe they're still there. And so we'll come back out again. That switch that went down to that industrial park was a single point switch. And you had to lift a plate up. And that's why he's got that rod there to lift that plate up so he can get in there and reach. There's a lever in there that kind of forced that point over. And he's filling with that so he can get it lined back to the main line. This day they were having a little bit of trouble with it. So all three of them were out there trying to get that point over. and cleaned out so they could throw the switch. But eventually here, and he must have got it because he's heading back, tying on to them 2 cars he left on the main. And then you can see we're street running all the way down to the lake. So here he takes off and heads down, and this is the area that he's heading to. So down here, you had the depot, you had Clear Lake Lumber and Farmers Co-op, and you also had the depot had an unloading ramp, and they would unload boxcars there of flour, because just to the north of the 2 there was or to the left of the 2 out of this map was a large bakery in Clear Lake that would supply buns and bread and other baked goods to a lot of the area grocery stores, and they would get boxcars of flour in 100-pound sacks, and they would unload them onto a flatbed truck and then drive them to the bakery, but they would get cars over here too. So here we are, now we're down towards downtown Clear Lake. You can see some of the business buildings in the background back behind that red truck there, but you can see they're walking along, taking their time shoving down to stay out of the way of traffic and stuff, or hopefully keep traffic out of their way. I knew a guy that worked this on the Mason City Clear Lake, and he said when they were up and switching that industrial park that we just were talking about, he said sometimes they would kick cars down Main Street, and he said it would freak out a lot of motorists, because here all of a sudden they'd be driving down Main Street, and here would be this guy riding this freewheeling boxcar rolling down the center of the street with no engine, and he said it would kind of freak some of the motorists out. But anyway, you can see they're walking alongside there. They're getting ready to shove down towards the depot area there. And now they're making the turn in towards the depot and elevator area. If you can see through that tree to the left, you can see the terracotta tile roof of the Mason City Clear Lake Depot, downtown Clear Lake. Here's where this next picture is taken. And here we're downtown Clear Lake now. The water tower there off to the left is basically the shoreline of the lake. So that gives you an idea how close we are to the lake. But this is the very east edge of downtown Clear Lake. The depot is that terracotta tile roof over there to the right. And then you had Farmers Elevator. You had a coal yard off to the left there at one time. But there was 3 or 4 tracks down here. 5, I think, tracks down here at this time. Just another shot there. Looks like they're spotting a car at the elevator at this time. Looks like they spotted another car off to the right there. That could be a carload of flour. It could be a carload of feed. This kind of shows, you can't quite see it in this picture, but the tracks still go up in front of that Clear Lake Lumber. The Main Street kind of curves off to the right here and goes in front of that Clear Lake Lumber and heads down through the middle of the business district and then to the lake. But by this time it was cut down just far enough to get into that Clear Lake Lumber Company. So here we'll stand on Main Street. We're basically standing, the depot would be to our back. And here's a photo of him going in, spotting a car there at Clear Lake Lumber. He's done spotting the car, now he's coming back out. But at this time, this was the extent, the very, very end of the track at Clear Lake. It used to go up the center of Main Street, like I said, to the lake, and then it would go along the lake shore and go to the resorts. But at this time, this was the end of the line here, just as far as they could go, that they needed to go to get into Clear Lake Lumber. If we turn directly around from where that shot was taken, this is the depot at Clear Lake. The yard back there is in the background behind this truck here and this Great Northern boxcar, but you can see that the bay window faces the street. Well, that's because the main line continued on from this point, like I said, and went up Main Street up to the lake. So the bay window was actually facing not the yard, but of course the main line. Here's the other side of the depot. You can see the business district there off to the right. The tracks, like I said, eventually, prior to this, went downtown, right through downtown, but this is the end of the line at this time. You can see off to the left there, there's a loading platform right to the left of the depot, and you can see the elevator in the background. They had tore out some of these tracks. There was 3 tracks off to the left, that there are 2 tracks off to the left that they tore out here in the early 60s. But Clark found this picture over at the Clear Lake Historical Society. And I like this picture because it shows them unloading these sacks of flour for the Clear Lake Bakery. So this is the bakery truck, and he's unloading sacks of flour. Then he'll truck it a few blocks from here and unload it there at the bakery. But I was glad to get this shot because it shows a car spotted over there at the feed mill, and it shows a carload of flour being unloaded onto the flatbed truck. Here's a shot. This is right before they tore up this. So this is right around 1963. But you can see the tracks off to the left are gone. There's only a couple tracks now to the right that service the elevator and feed mill, and a track so they can unload flour cars. But this is right before they tore the tracks up. They tore the tracks up from that industrial park to this point, right around the late 1963. They left the tracks into the industrial park, but this was all gone after 1963. This elevator was torn down, the depot was torn down, and they built a Fairway grocery store here. Here's a shot kind of showing everything. 1963, we're looking towards downtown, but you can see the depot and the elevator and the feed mill there. Kind of a neat little area. I always thought that was pretty neat. The guy that I knew that worked here during this time, when they would go over to Clear Lake, a lot of times they would take lunch. So inevitably there's a tavern right across the street from the depot, the town pump. So I'm sure these guys, the poles are down. So I'm sure this crew is over at the town pump having a beer and having lunch. You can see they got one car to take back to Mason City with them. They'll probably pick up more out at the industrial park, but it's lunchtime in this photo, I'm sure. There's that same train. There's that Southern boxcar in the back. Looks like they picked up a pressurized tank car from the thermogas dealer there in the industrial park, but he's heading east now back towards Mason City. There was a hill here, pretty good size hill. In fact, they had to grade it down, and that's why you see this retaining wall here along the houses, because it was steep enough to where the trolley cars couldn't make it up that hill very easily. So they graded it down to make it a little bit easier grade. This is back in Mason City now. We're right standing outside of State Brand Creamery, but this would be like your typical train coming from Clear Lake. First couple cars are petroleum products, probably, or out of the Great Lakes Pipeline Company. Looks like you have an empty, probably Rock Island hopper there. Probably had aggregate in it, and that was probably from Zeidler Concrete. Same with the car after it, the cement hopper, and it looks like a couple pressurized tanks, empty, that came from the thermogas dealer there over at Clear Lake. So this would be like your typical train coming from Clear Lake. What he'll do now is he'll start delivering them cars off to the respective railroads that they're billed to, and finish his day over in Mason City. These are the photo credits. Art Peterson gave me a bunch of great color photos. A lot of these photos of Clear Lake were from the Peterson Cramble Archive, and Art Peterson let me use them. And a lot of these were from Soft Marty, who was a photographer there. He was a dermatologist, but he lived in Mason City. He took a lot of these photos also. But these are the photo credits that I used. And that's it.
Looking on
So-
Google Earth, it looks like the line ends at I-35 now.
Yes, it does. Right underneath the bridge there at 35. So if any of you guys want to come off mute and ask me any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions or. No questions?
Very nice.
Very
Thank you.
nice. I went to school at Waldorf College, not too far from there. Makes me
Oh,
mad I
in
didn't get,
Waverly.
yeah. That makes me mad I didn't get over there more often.
Yeah, I mean, like it's still, I mean, it's still there. They still use these same motors. But the active part of the railroad is basically from Emory to Clear Lake Junction. That's where all the industry is now. They got into a soybean plant over there. There was a biodiesel plant that built just east of Emory. They use the old State Brand Creamery for transload now. They got a couple other they do a lot of transloading at Emery. There's the place where they unload salt and different chemicals and stuff over there. It's a busy little railroad, but it's only like a 3-mile section that's really used. The rest of it, like the line west of Emery to Clear Lake, is basically used for car storage. The main line is. Same way with the east end up towards the Emmons St. L and the Milwaukee transfers. That's pretty much car storage. So there's about a 3 or 4 mile area there that they still operate, and they operate every day, or 7 or 5 days a week anyway, and during the day. So if you wanted to go see them, these same motors would be out there running. But yeah, it's a lot more compact as far as where all the action is now.
You should also add that they basically run in the mornings. I've known rail fans that go up there on a weekend or an afternoon and everything's already shut down. So it's pretty much during the week, during the mornings.
Yeah, they're usually done by noon.
Yeah.
And then they might go out in the afternoon if they get a call for something special, but for the most part, they're usually done by lunchtime.
Hey,
Of the-
Jason,
Okay.
Jason, let me ask you a question. I was watching some of the pictures and I noticed 2 freight cars in particular. One was at the elevator in Clear Lake. There was a box car there. It had like 2-tone color, light blue in the top and a darker blue at the bottom.
Lancaster,
I'm not
and- Lancaster and Chester.
Yep,
sure.
Rapido's
Really?
making that car. Rapido's
And
making that.
Rapido has just announced that car.
Yep, that's a cool car.
Well, it's kind of a long way from home, but then in one of your videos, it showed a couple of boxcars getting pulled across the road from a industry, and one of the first car out was a Sacramento Northern. That
Yep.
one had to be far away from home.
Little bit of everything.
What's
And the
left of that?
Sacramento Northern's another electric line.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the first pictures showed an NC and St. L boxcar with the bumblebee stripes.
Oh,
Yes, that
man.
was being pulled off. The Milwaukee job was pulling that car. Yep.
What's left of the main line railroads that went through there?
The Emmons St. L is gone. The Milwaukee is now the CP or CPKC. The Northwestern, the original Northwestern line from Belle Plaine up to Fairmont, that's still active just as a stub. They used to park trains out there, like loaded coal trains and stuff, but that's still just kind of yard limit stuff, but that's still in. The Great Western Rock Island joint trackage is still through town, and of course the Northwestern bought the spine line, so the Rock Island is still active through town.
It's now the UP though.
Yeah, it's now the UP, right? And then let me see. I think that's it, because the Great Western south of there is torn up. So yeah, so it'd be just the UP and the CP,
Yep.
and then of course the Iowa traction.
Mm-hmm. Pretty
So,
cool.
yeah, it was an interesting town. I mean, I grew up here, and Clark spent most of his adult life here and stuff, and nobody's ever put anything really together comprehensively about the railroad, at least at this time. And I was happy because when I started this research for this, I had enough to go off just the soft Marty photos and some other photos. But when I started this project, I had just enough to do a little bit of a presentation. But as soon as I started digging and stuff, more and more photos popped up. And like I said, this Art Peterson came up with a ton of these pictures, and he didn't know any captions. They had no captions. And so he told me, he says, I'll send you copies of these pictures if you can just give captions to them. So Clark and I spent a couple weeks captioning all these great images, especially those ones. A lot of the ones taken over at Clear Lake are from the Peterson Cramble archive, and they're beautiful photographers. And what the deal was is there was several photographers, one from Kalmbach, and there was a guy that I don't know which one it was, but there was a company photographer for the Nickel Plate Road, and he was on his way. Those guys were on their way out west to go to see the Milwaukee overhead wire stuff out in Montana. So on their way out to Montana, they stopped in Mason City, and Clear Lake and took those pictures. And I was
Hmm.
glad because pictures of the Mason City and Clear Lake when the line went all the way downtown and stuff are really, really rare.
Yeah. Very nice.
All right.
Very interesting. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate
You
it.
bet.
Really interesting. Great photos. And so much
Yeah.
color. Really neat.
Yeah, I was really happy with. I even ended up with more than what you see here. I could do another half an hour on just the other photos that came up. But yeah, these
So-
are.
Oh.
It's always when you start looking for something and get everything done and get a presentation done, then more stuff, kind of
Yeah,
shows
that's
up.
when, yeah, all right. Absolutely.
Uh,
Well, let's see. I can't remember who we've got next week. Let me take a quick look here. Is it you, David? David might have left.
Yeah, he's gone.
You might be sleeping. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is Dave next week. So he's
Okay.
going to do a piece on sill steps or stirrup steps, how that's modeled. So we'll look forward to that. Wait a second. No, I got that wrong. No, that is right. Okay, so thanks again, Jason. We'll see everybody next week. Have a great Thursday. Good night.
Good night.
See you, Greg. Thank you.